To recapitulate our study of Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad, he has been describing the working of the senses and the mind operating through the senses to reach out and enter in relation with things. But there is a deeper functioning behind of which our surface consciousness is a very small, limited reflection. The real mind behind, the Upanishad declares, is infinite. And it knows not only what the outer senses have seen, but what they have not seen. And not only what the intellectual process knows, but what it does not yet know. And this he shows through 3 examples, how it operates in animal life at an instinctive level, or in human life also, when we are not conscious. That inner mind is operating constantly, registering. It even knows things which the surface mind does not or cannot know. This now he brings in context of the Vedantic terminology of the 4 functions of any active consciousness: Vijnana, Prajnana, Sanjnana and Ajnana. Vijnana is that comprehensive consciousness which holds everything in right relation. Prajnana is that energy going out to seize in order to know, and through a process of analysis and synthesis tries to know, organize, place before objectively, place in right relation. Samjnana is the faculty by which we draw in an image to feel it in substance. And Ajnana is that faculty by which we are able to act, to master, to express our intention in right action. Of these 4, Samjnana is essentially the function which is the foundation of all our senses. It draws in an image and feels it as if in substance. And so he says that inner mind has also a larger operation of these 4 functions, including a vaster action of the Sanjnana, which is not limited by the action of the physical sense organs. And it is this which is able to hear things and register. It is this which knows the movement of the forms of the animals and is able to sense what is the right point on which to strike. Similarly, there is a larger, vaster action of Prajnana, which knows the proper relationships of the words and is able to also sense which is the fulcrum of all the movements in the animal body or insect. These are the things which are operating even in human consciousness, unknown to us. When you observe a gymnast making a very skillful somersault, or a child for the first time walking on a raised edge and maintaining his balance, if you observe carefully, in the child's body there are several different sets of muscles operating. The toes are operating to maintain the balance. The ankles have their own larger muscles working to balance. At the knees, at the hips, even at the waist, and then with the movement of the hands. Now these are at least 5 different sets of muscles. Each is doing what it needs to do to keep the balance. And yet all of them are constantly in synchronization, knowing exactly how much the hands should move to compensate for the waist, which knows exactly how much it should move to compensate for the limitations of the ankles and so on. there has to be some faculty which knows all of these relative to each other in space, knowing the strengths of the muscles and how much the pull will modify the position of the overall balance of the body and the center of gravity. And there has to be some knowledge behind which is coordinating all these, and some power of action which knows exactly how much to tighten which muscle to keep the overall balance, because none of this is happening at a conscious level in the child's mind. And these are all these vaster actions. The Vijnana holds the overall coordination of all these parts. It knows the entire body as one single whole in perfect relation of all the muscles, their tendencies, their capacities, the extent of their action and the effect on the whole body, and so on. The Prajnana holds the right relation of the pieces, and the Ajnana is holding the right balance of how much to push, how much to pull exactly. If you take the analogy in a robotics, in an aircraft, you will find again all these four functions, except they have had to be programmed, they have had to be trained, they have been gathered through accumulation of observations, or sometimes by formulations of relationships, mathematical relationships by some human being, and those are embedded somewhere in the computer, in the memory, in the actuating machinery, and so on. But someone had to put it together. In this new young child who's never done this action, who has programmed it? And it is not at a genetic level. And it is this consciousness behind, the infinite mind behind, which knows what needs to be done, and it operates at a subconscious level through the body consciousness to do what is right, as long as the conscious mind does not intervene and spoil the right action or the right perception. And so now Sri Aurobindo brings focus to this faculty of Sanjnana, conscious as well as of the inner mind. And here he points to something very special in the operation of the five senses. Well, Sanjnana, which draws in the image and feels in substance, that faculty is operating through all five senses. But if you observe carefully, the essential faculty is operating independent of the form of the senses. Whether it is vibration of sound in the air or picturing through light, it does not matter. Sanjnana draws in and senses, feels, irrespective of the particular form of the five senses. So he says, there is an action of the sense mind which is superior to the particular action of the senses, and is aware of things even without imaging them in forms of sight, sound, contact, but which also as a sort of subordinate operation does image in these forms. And he says subordinate but necessary to completeness of presentation. So when, for example, you are listening to a distant sound, there is spontaneously an imaging of the location from which the sound seems to come. When you register the sound, there is spontaneously a kind of a sensate character. This is heavy, this is dull, or this is light, this is soft. And so you see all five senses intermingling. But shorn of all five senses, there's something even more essential, which I can feel something, I don't yet know what form, what quality, what words to use. And so for this, Sri Aurobindo gives examples. Those who have worked, experimented with paranormal phenomena, he says, sensing things in the minds of others, things at great distances, things that belong to another plane, all of these are sensed without image. without definite image proper to the five senses, and yet there's some kind of a perception. So you walk into a forest where trees are being cut, and you sense, and you say, the spirit of the forest is unhappy with this tree cutting. What are you sensing? The spirit of the forest. Does it have a picture, a form, a sound, a taste, a touch, a color? None of these. And yet you sense it, you sense its mood, and subordinately there may be some kind of an imaging, some sense of an expanse that fills the forest, some sense of something, a form presiding over the expansion of the forest, and so on. Similarly, you sense at a great distance the weather. You cannot say whether it's raining or not, there's no picture yet, but you feel humidity. You feel that people there are cheerful or they're not so cheerful. And then from there images may form. But the initial contact itself does not have any of the five senses. And so he says some jnana, when it acts, has this level of operation which is beyond the five senses. And this proves something very important, that the actual power of sensing is not dependent on the form of the five senses or the organs associated with the five senses. And it leads to a very important conclusion when we observe the nature of evolution of these instruments of the senses. And this he describes now. This shows, in the first place, that sight and the other senses are not mere results of the development of our physical organs in the terrestrial evolution. Because the power to perceive acts long before the form of sight operates. So that perception does not depend on the way in which the eyes evolved or the way in which the hearing evolved. What is it dependent on? What leads? Mind, subconscious in all matter and evolving in matter, has developed these physical organs in order to apply its inherent capacities of sight, hearing, etc. on the physical plane by physical means for a physical life. So if we recognize that the essential perception is belonging to mind, even its five particular forms are belonging to mind irrespective of the physical organs, then we conclude that as mind evolves in matter, at first subconscious, but still present, it begins to organize these five kinds of organs for the purpose of expressing its inherent capacities of sight, hearing, etc. And it organizes them so that it can have an experience in physical life by physical means. But mind itself is not belonging to the physical domain. It is only subconscious and emerging into conscious awareness, separate from matter. But, he says, they are inherent capacities and not dependent on the circumstance of terrestrial evolution. And they can be employed without the use of the physical eye, ear, skin, palate. So the conclusion here is inevitable, that these are capacities inherent to mind. The circumstances of terrestrial evolution of the senses are secondary. This mind, therefore, can use these senses without the use of the physical machinery. Now, in Sri Aurobindo is always very careful with his words, so we can just see why he uses this word. He says, physical eye, ear, skin, palate. Eye, ear and skin are touching three of the senses, and palate is covering two other senses in one go. Smell and taste. You notice these two are very closely connected. When you eat food, you are tasting and smelling at the same time. And the word used is palate. It's a very subtle nuance involved here. You don't say tongue. In the English language, this is the nature of the language, you can't say that you have a very sensitive tongue. It doesn't sound nice. Tongue is associated more with the physical organ, not with the skill and capacity of taste. So for that, the English language has a different word, palate. But palate is above. It's not the tongue. It's not where the tasting is taking place. But the suggestion in the language is that it's that part which is bridging the smell and the taste. The palate is the upper part of the mouth. Just above it is the machinery inside the nose which smells. Just below it is the machinery of the tongue which tastes. So it kind of captures the dual activity. This is just an aside. So mind is able to act by these inherent capacities without this biological machinery. Supposing that there are psychical senses which act through a psychical body, and we thus explain these psychical phenomena, still that action also is only an organization of the inherent functioning of the essential sense, the sandhyana, which in itself can operate without bodily organs. So when he says supposing, that's the way occult science explains this capacity to perceive things where the physical senses are not operative. So we say that mind has its own innate five sense faculty which can act irrespective of the physical sense, and because mind itself is not bound to gross body and is part of a larger universal mind, it can extend itself and sense through its universality all the things. And when it senses, it uses its inherent five functions of senses to see, smell, taste, touch, even at a distance. So first, let's say somebody concentrating to view a faraway place. We draw on the example of the militarily trained remote viewers who were taught to spy using psychic abilities. So this person concentrates, he projects himself in a location in the other country. He is given coordinates, numbers, which make no sense to the surface mind. But as he leans to reach to where those coordinates are, it is not his conscious mind, but the inner mind, the vaster action of the infinite mind which kicks in, which knows what these numbers mean. It knows these are coordinates of that particular location on the earth according to current human belief systems, because these are things organized by a convention of human beings. But it knows exactly what the human beings mean by those numbers, and it automatically directs the focus of the consciousness to that location. And then this remote viewer says, I sense a large building. It seems to be made of very heavy material. It has a roof which feels like metal. So he's as if touching. And out of that the image forms. The roof is slanted. And then he begins to draw something. And then he hears sounds as if banging, scraping, cutting. And then he is asked to enter the building, and he enters and describes other structures and so on. All of this you will find easily available on the internet. People describing, you will see people doing remote viewing sessions. All through, you are first sensing something at an essential level, and then from there you get into the five senses and articulate through form, sound, color, taste, touch, smell, and so on. And so we say there is a subtle body. He uses this word here, psychical senses in the subtle body. In a psychical body, psychical senses through which all this is explained. Still, he says, the essential sense, the sandhyana, can operate even there. And it senses first before the five senses kick in, even on the subtle level. Still, that action also is only an organization of the inherent functioning of the essential sense, the samjnana, which in itself can operate without bodily organs. And so now he focuses on this essential sense. This essential sense is the original capacity of consciousness to feel in itself all that consciousness has formed, and to feel it in all the essential properties and operations of that which has form, whether represented materially by vibration of sound or images of light or any other physical symbol. So now this essential functioning power of samjnana, how does it really operate? And now we are going to something where you have removed all the physical sense organs, removed even the subtle sense organs. There is only consciousness and object of consciousness. And that consciousness has a capacity to feel in itself all that consciousness has formed. So the question can be asked, how does pure consciousness feel something which is form? Flower, fruit, or something else? Because this flower or fruit is formed out of consciousness. And consciousness feels all that emerges out of consciousness, because that also contains consciousness, its own consciousness, in a universal level. So inherent to all consciousness, there is the original capacity of consciousness to feel in itself all that consciousness has formed. And so when we say, let's say the flower emerges, the consciousness as the original substratum out of which the energy and force form the flower, that original substratum of consciousness is still there, and it therefore can feel all that it has formed. And also to feel it in all the essential properties and operations of that which has form. Anything which has form, consciousness being inherent in it, can therefore feel through it all the properties, all the operations, even at an essential level of itself and even of things other. If it senses things in itself, then obviously consciousness outside, which is connected, a part of one whole consciousness, can also feel this. So let's say flower is out there, my consciousness is here, but this separation of flower and me is only an artificial separation. The reality is one underlying indivisible consciousness. That in the flower knows flower intimately from inside out. All of its properties, all of its operations. And because that consciousness is also in me, it feels what is inside flower. Because it can feel what is inside flower, it can then secondarily image it for me, or bring the sensation of contact, of touch, or the vibration of sound, and so on. So whether represented materially by vibration of sound or image of light or any other physical symbol, it can directly sense those things. And so the material representation is only an indirect representation. This being the case, now we can understand why sense is possible fundamentally. Because there is one consciousness, and that one consciousness can know from within all of its forms. And because it is one consciousness, things across forms can also know themselves and know each other. The rest now is only a question of organization. In the subtle body, this knowing can take the form of the five senses without physical organs. In the gross body, the five senses and their operations need to be organized through physical means in physical substance, but they are only a reflected organization of something which is inherent to consciousness of mind. Now the question remains, why five? Because in the subtle body there are five senses without needing separate organs. You see, the subtle body, when it projects to feel far away, through the subtle senses does not need to project a subtle eye on that location, does not need to project a subtle skin or finger on that location to feel. It simply extends consciousness, and in consciousness feels all five senses. So in the subtle body at least we do not need separate organs, but yet from this essential sense in consciousness, the samjnana, there is a split, a separation into five very distinct kinds of perception. Where does this come from? And now Sri Aurobindo is taking us to this great insight, for which we must first understand how at all the formation of the senses take place when pure consciousness knows inherently where is this sense of form. So he explains this. The trend of knowledge, meaning modern knowledge in science, psychology, etc., the trend of knowledge leads more and more to the conclusion that not only are the properties of form, even the most obvious such as color, light, etc., merely operations of force, but form itself is only an operation of force. So now we are reducing all experience of form and formation to something essential: force. This is described very directly in the yogic vocabulary, but modern science independently, through a very different approach, through an objectivized exploration, comes to the same conclusion. And what's the conclusion? When we observe color, light, other qualities of form like contact, pressure, softness, resonance of vibration, etc., all of these are essentially force. The properties of form, even the most obvious such as color, light, etc., are operations of force. And how? Observe, what do we mean by light? What do we mean by color? We say, this is how science explains it, light reflects off a surface, strikes your eye. But what is striking your eye is energy in movement, force. When the intensity of the energy is higher, we say it has a higher frequency and a higher color. When the energy is lower, then we say it has a lower frequency and a lower color in a spectrum. But when light itself strikes the object and rebounces, what distinguishes this bounce quality against that bounce quality? This is metal sheet, stainless steel, it reflects light and shines. That is a velvet cloth, it absorbs light, very little light comes from it, and the color changes when the light comes to me. What determines the difference between these two is essentially the light meeting the material being modified by force. When the force on the surface of the metal pushes back on the light or responds to light in a particular way, it gives a clear reflection with the same color. When it responds in a particular way, absorbing partly, reflecting another part, modifying during reflection, or itself oscillating and vibrating to absorb the light and release a different ray of light, you have change of color. And all of these are really force meeting light and modifying the operation of light. What is light itself? Force. Force meeting force, being modified and returning in a modified force. That's essentially the experience of light and color. The same thing if you observe, my finger touches the metal, it feels cool. It touches the velvet, it feels warm. What's happening? When the hand touches metal, the point of contact involves exchange of force, of vibration. We say heat transfer. What is heat transfer? Two objects vibrating, one object vibrating less, and the higher vibrating object transfers its vibration to the other. At least that's how science explains it. The other becomes warm, this loses energy, it becomes cool. So I touch metal becomes warm, my finger becomes cool. I touch velvet, Velvet does not absorb that vibration, rather it resonates and gives it back. So the heat in between builds up and my own body heat accumulates and I begin to feel warm. Alright, I say metal is hard and velvet is soft. What's the nature of the activity? As my finger touches, at the level of molecules and atoms, there is a movement of force meeting vibration of force. And in the metal, the force resists, opposes the force of my finger, and I feel it hard. In the velvet, the force meeting my finger's pressure gives in, and the fine fibers of the velvet bend, and so I feel it soft. All contact is force meeting force and modifying force. All sight is force meeting force, modifying force. All hearing now is vibration meeting eardrum, force meeting force. Smell, taste, etc. Everything is vibration of force meeting force, modifying force, and so on. So he says the trend of knowledge leads more and more to the conclusion that not only are the properties of form, even the most obvious such as color, light, etc., merely operations of force, but form itself is an operation of force. Now we come to an even greater insight. Okay, the properties are operation of force. But what is form? When I look at a flower and I say, oh, this is so beautiful, it has such nice colors, it is so symmetric, it is so soft, it has a perfume. The form of the flower is distinct, the light may reflect from the form, my finger may touch the form. But if you dwell on it a little more, what is it that makes for the form and substance? Light meets something and is modified. What is it meeting? There is not some thing there that it is meeting the force of that thing. At the surface is an electrical field meeting the ripple of an electromagnetic field, which is light. An electrical field meeting electrical field, force meeting force, modifying, bouncing, etc. Where is the substance of flower? If you think about it carefully, there is no such thing. They speak of an electron and the field of an electron. They take a picture of an electron or an atom. But what are you picturing? You are sending rays of something, in other words force, which enter in interaction with some force and bounce back. And the pattern of the bouncing is what you call form. Interesting, isn't it? There need be nothing there. It's just a response of force leading to a particular pattern which gives you the sense of form. And this is the reality. You know what is a hologram? A hologram is not a physical object. It's light passing through a pattern of lines being modified, and you look through that sheet and it looks like there's an object there in 3 dimensions. Oh yes, there is a substance, there is a form, but where is the form? In the sheet, there are only lines modifying the shape of the light reflection or transmission. There is no form finally. All is only force modifying light or any other response, creating the appearance of form. The pattern of reflection or refraction or modification determines the sense of the appearance of form. So, but I'm sitting on this chair, it has a form and it is solid. No, it is only force in certain rhythmic movements, pushing back my hands when I rest them on it, pushing and modifying the light which reflects from it, and so on. There is only force there. Science actually recognizes this when it says that the atom itself is never directly touched. A particle is never directly in contact with another particle. It is the field which meets the field, force meeting force. In fact, the electron as such need not be a separate particle at all. It's only the cause of the force field. As long as you have cause of force field and force field exists, you only conceive of an electron there, and there may be no actual object. The most advanced theories of physics come to this conclusion because you have a problem. The moment you say there's an electron as a structure, as an object, the next question is, what is inside it? What holds it together? Because the whole thing is one negative charge, it should explode apart. What determines its size? And there are no answers. So the latest theories of the electron are simply that it is an oscillating wave, rippling out. And you are meeting the ripples, and in the center is only the oscillating energy. There is no thing, object itself. And if this is true of the fundamental particles, all other constructs like atom, molecule, etc. are only constructs of rhythmic vibrating force. So he says, form itself is an operation of force. He puts a capital F because now we are speaking of force at its most essential level, not only physical but even other levels. What is this force? This force again proves to be self-power of conscious being in a state of energy and activity. Now this is a statement which is very profound, needs a little elaboration, because now he is going to the essence of where the force came from. So physics says there's an oscillating wave which is rippling out, but what caused it? What started the oscillation? What holds the oscillation? What gives it this particular frequency, this particular energy, this particular way of rippling out? Physics says we don't know, that's how it is. Sri Aurobindo is answering, what does it? And so this is going to the essence of all reality. Force again proves to be, what is force? Self-power of conscious being in a state of energy and activity. Conscious awareness, exercising its power to move, to be in activity, to energize itself. Consciousness is energy of consciousness. Being energy of consciousness, it can activate the energy into movement. And when it chooses to move, well, it starts the rippling movement and you have the appearance of an electron. When consciousness in infinity begins to ripple and move everywhere, it creates all these waves which appear like many electrons moving around. When the waves are out of phase with each other, it is a positron. An electron and a positron are only waves in different phase to each other. When they are in the same phase, they repel each other. When they are in different phase, they attract each other. But what are they essentially? Self-power of consciousness, asserting itself in movement with energy. So the origin of all force in the universe, the origin of all form and its properties, is consciousness choosing to activate itself in movement of energy. So he has a footnote here, because these are such important ideas. He links them to the ancient tradition of yoga. He links it to the text from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Devatma Shakti Swagunair Nigudham. Nigudham. Devatma Shakti. Deva, divine, Atma, self, Shakti. The self energy, the divine self energy. Swagunair, by its own quality, by its own property, inherent. Nigudham, concealed, covered up. So by this power of self-power of divine consciousness conceals itself by its own properties. In other words, when you see form, the form conceals the truth which is inside, which is this conscious energy of consciousness in movement. And that to us appears like form, property. Oh, here's a flower which looks pink, it has this shape and it's made of this soft substance. The reality, consciousness activating itself energetically to rhythm in particular ways that causes light entering in relation with it to bounce in a particular way that gives the pink color, that causes my finger meeting it to experience a particular form of push and pull of resistance to make it feel soft, and so on. The reality is only divine consciousness rhythming out, expressing itself. So this force again proves to be self-power of conscious being in a state of energy and activity. If it chooses to withdraw its activity and shut down its energetic expression, just become quiet in energy, instantly the agitation and movement of rhythming will stop. Electron has vanished. So physics puts it this way: when there is a strong electrical field, in the middle of it spontaneously electrons and positrons emerge. Why do they emerge? How do they emerge? So the truth is this: when we will translate this in spiritual vocabulary, when there is a pressure of consciousness, it creates the rippling rhythms which emerge in the appearance of forms of particles. It makes a lot of sense, and it's not contrary to physics, and yet it bridges the truth of the physical reality with the truth of the spiritual, deeper consciousness. So conclusion: practically, therefore, all form is only an operation of consciousness impressing itself with presentations of its own workings. So everywhere you see a form, it is actually consciousness imprinting on itself a particular presentation of its working. Here, I present this particular rhythm of working. And immediately you say, here's a pink flower. I present myself now in this different representation of rhythms and working. Say, here's a sheet of metal. But all the while, it is consciousness modulating itself. We see color because that is the presentation which consciousness makes to itself of one of its own operations. So now the next question: if that is the way it's rhythming in the flower, why is it my sight, my mind represents it as pink? If you think about it rationally, if it is only a question of the length of your retina's conical cells and so on, then each one of us should see different colors. All of us see pink. All of us see blue. Except when there's a defect in the eye, then two colors get merged or so on. But otherwise, generally, when the eye is healthy, we see the same color. If color was merely a perception of how the cells in your retina react, then all of us should be seeing everything in the world differently colored. All of us agree blue has a soothing, cooling feeling. Red has an activating, brightening, agitating, dynamic feeling, and so on. Why is it we see the same color, although our eyes are completely different, although the entire optic nerve is completely differently arranged in each of our eyes and even changes across our lifetime from child to adult? And the brain's wiring is completely different in all of us and is changing through our life. And yet we see the same color from childhood to adulthood across all species. Why is it that? Because the one who sees is neither the eye nor the retina nor the brain, but the mind inside using the brain and the organs of the eyes. And my mind is part of universal mind, as is your mind and everyone's mind. And universal mind chooses to see its own rhythms of consciousness in this way, and therefore all of us through our organs see it in the same way. So if tomorrow an extraterrestrial with a completely different biology form were to see the same flower, perhaps the range of his eyesight is larger, but the pink will still be pink. He may see more colors than we do because the range is larger, but still the pink will be pink and the blue will be blue. He may see more shades of the pink and the blue, but he will still see it as pink, and not pink as green and green as pink. Because it is one universal mind which represents to itself this particular rhythm in this manner, and therefore all mind in all embodiments see it in that way. We see color because that is the presentation which consciousness makes to itself of one of its operations. And we will see there are several operations which make for the several senses. But color is only an operation of force working in the form of light. And light again is only a movement, that is to say, an operation of force. So color is an operation of light, light is an operation of force. So color itself is indirectly through two layers of working an operation of force. The question is, what is essential to this operation of force, taking on itself the presentation of form? For it is this that must determine the working of sanjnana or sense on whatever plane it may operate. So now we are coming to the crux of the problem, a problem which modern robotics cannot answer, modern biology cannot answer, modern psychology cannot answer, and none of the current tools of science or psychology can answer this question. And the question itself is therefore ignored because it is unanswerable. That's how it is. The only hope we can say, one day we will find out how. But this question has been asked by the Upanishads and has been answered. And Sri Aurobindo is now leading us to that. What is essential to this operation of force taking on itself the presentation of form? In other words, when there is this movement of force and consciousness looks upon it and the presentation of force to consciousness, what is it that makes for this to appear as color, for this to appear as sound, for this to appear as form, and so on? And so now we are going to the essence of all perception. Sri Aurobindo goes now to the heart of the mechanism by which the one indivisible consciousness appears in divided forms. So it's a long and detailed discussion which should be fully appreciated, but we will first skim over it to get the overall sense of it and then go down into the details. We are going to first foundations. Everything begins with vibration or movement. The original kshobha or disturbance, this is a technical term from the yogic tradition, that at the very origin of creation, when there is one indivisible consciousness, at first there is this disturbance, vibration, kshobha. Something in the consciousness chooses to move, to agitate. If there is no movement of the conscious being, it can only know its own pure static existence. Without vibration or movement of being and consciousness, there can be no act of knowledge and therefore no sense. What a profound insight. We see it first subjectively within us. I am aware. So let's say I am sitting in a stunned awareness, blank completely, I am simply aware. Nothing is happening. But in that awareness, I now choose to observe my own awareness. Is my awareness awake or asleep? The very act of choosing to know is a ripple, is a disturbance, is a movement in the consciousness which turns upon consciousness to know itself. If there was not this urge to know and the movement to know, I would simply be static, simply aware. The moment there is need to know, there has to be movement. Or putting it the other way, unless there is movement, there cannot be knowledge, an act of knowledge. And if there is no act of knowledge, there is no sense. Any seeing requires consciousness to move in relation to itself in order to know and thereby to see, which means movement. No movement, no seeing, no knowledge, simply awareness. Movement compels some perception, some contact, some knowledge. Movement of conscious being as knowledge, becoming sensible of itself as movement of force. In other words, the knowledge separating itself from its own working to watch that and take it into itself again by feeling. That is the basis of universal sanjnana. So again, the whole concept is for us so new, we have to allow it to seep in. But you'll see essentially, therefore, being, which is conscious awareness, makes a movement as knowledge, to know itself, becoming sensible of itself as movement of force. In other words, I get to know myself in rhythm of force, in movement, and the knowledge separating from its own working. See, I am trying to know, but I am in the effort to know. But when I stand back in the awareness of knowing, that is the basis of sanjnana, which takes in perception. We'll review this next time with more examples, but let's see where the description is going. This is true both of our internal and external operation. So we saw the example of what happens when we turn to know ourselves. When I want to know, is my consciousness awake or asleep? So there is a turning to know, and the knowledge separates itself from its own working. Am I conscious or am I awake? And the knowledge itself is now standing apart. I am awake, or it says I am half asleep. And the knowledge takes a position separate from the consciousness itself. Sensation, sense has taken place. So this is true internally and externally. He gives examples. I become anger by vibration of conscious force acting on nervous emotion, and I feel the anger I have become by another movement of conscious force acting as light of knowledge. So first I am angry. Something is agitating. But how do I know I am angry? Because a part of my consciousness separates and watches this movement of anger. And so I say, I realize I am angry. I am agitated. I am disturbed. Otherwise I would be one with the anger, but I wouldn't know that I am angry. The knowing that I am angry involves something separating, as if observing. There's a light of knowledge as distinct from vibration of conscious force where I am simply identified with the anger. I am conscious of my body because I have become the body. The same force of conscious being which has made this form of itself, this presentation of its workings, knows it in that form, in that presentation. I can know nothing except what I myself am. If I know others, it is because they also are myself. Because myself has assumed these apparently alien presentations, as well as that which is nearest to my own mental center. That is, I am me only because it's nearest to my mental center. All sensation, all action of sense is thus the same in essence, whether external or internal, physical or psychical. You cannot know something unless you are one with it on some level. And then this act of separating to know what you are one with is the perception. Now all of this is possible because there is movement in consciousness, vibration, the kshobha, the original disturbance, which creates one kind of perception. And then he describes how successively this vibration undergoes a further modification. There is vibration creating rhythm. Secondly, there is a contact of the rhythms. Third, there is the grouping of the movements which are in contact, creating the sense of shape. Fourth, there is a welling up of the essential force in the continuity of the movement. And fifth, the compression of the force in its movements which maintains the form. And therefore 5 senses. We'll see this again in detail next time, but you get the sense where it's going. Unless that vibration of consciousness began, you would not have knowledge and perception. Once that begins, it undergoes 5 stages of modification. Each of those becomes a different kind of perception, of consciousness meeting form of object. The form itself has 5 different qualities. And so they call them, loosely today we say 5 elements. But they are not elements, they are elemental principles of formation. And therefore we say air is also form, but it doesn't have distinct form. Vibration first in an ether, from where you experience contact. From there the fire principle, where the contact allows for stability of form. From there the water principle, which coagulates, and then finally the earth principle, which makes for permanence. Now we will see how all these are successive modifications on the original vibration, but each allows you therefore to perceive differently the nature of form and 5 gradations. Modern science will say, these are only states of matter. Airy state, liquid state, solid state, and so on. But why are there distinct states? Because there are degrees of gradations of vibration. And so here you see how one single original consciousness, by its conscious intention to know and to ripple out, becomes cause of 5 levels of self-modification, leading to the appearance of separate forms and objects, which seem to be separate but are all formed from the same one original consciousness. And because there were 5 degrees or gradations of vibrational modification, you can perceive objects in 5 different ways, or 5 grades of perception. A single object will have all 5 grades. Therefore you can see, taste, hear, smell, touch, etc. But one of these is more prominent, at least in the way you enter in contact with it. Therefore some things you see from far but you can't taste and touch and smell. But other things you can't see but you can taste and touch, like air. You can smell air, you can touch air, and so on. Each of the 5 elemental principles characterizes a particular sense in predominance. But all are modifications of one original power of consciousness turned to know itself, the original samjnana. So now we get a big picture sense of what it is he is describing. Next time we will go a little more into detail, see with many more examples, and allow the whole perception to become more and more clear and vivid in our consciousness. And so we see how mind, when it perceives, naturally tends to perceive in 5 different ways, even though it doesn't use any biological senses. And therefore mind, when it organizes itself in evolution in body, must necessarily organize 5 different sense powers through 5 material forms, processes, which make for the 5 kinds of organs that allow us to perceive differently. But behind it all is one essential consciousness, being able to perceive essentially and with 5 gradations of its essential perception. It's a fascinating exploration, and it goes so deep into the understanding of reality, but also the understanding of what's happening inside us when we see, when we hear, even when we know essentially. And from that deeper understanding, we can explain the full range of sensory phenomena in the universe across all the planes. It's an essential insight which is true across all planes. Not only on the physical plane you have the 5 elemental conditions and 5 senses, but even on the subtle plane you have these 5 elemental conditions and therefore 5 senses. They may be more plastic, more complete, more rich, but still it's the same functioning across the whole range of creation. From consciousness of oneness to the extreme of consciousness of multiplicity. He has got the essential principle which allows for this perception of sense and knowledge. So we'll pause here for today and we can meditate on this briefly.